CHQT Edmonton is iNews 880, a Chorus Entertainment station. On radio, online, on demand. This is iNews 880.
Honeybee invasion. Bullock says all they want is nectar. They don't hang out at barbecues, and they rarely sting. Brenton Dreger, iNews 880.
Hi there. I was just polishing up a story.
This is a video. I'm from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan.
I was born in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, but I was raised about an hour away in Port Hope, Ontario, Canada.
I'm actually from right here in Edmonton. I'm a West End girl, born and raised, and surprisingly running into quite a few of you, apparently. So, West Side representing.
Well, now I am from Edmonton, but I grew up about 100 kilometers west of the city in the lovely town of Evansburg.
I am from originally St. Albert, Alberta, which is just north of Edmonton, but it's more or less a suburb, so I've always considered myself to be essentially an Edmontonian.
I'm from Edmonton.
I'm from Beaumont.
Well, I'm from a little village known as Austin, Manitoba. It's about halfway between Winnipeg and Brandon, right on the Trans-Canada. So, but population 500-ish, 499 since I left.
The most interesting story that I've covered this year was the Slave Lake disaster. I was working the Monday morning after the big disaster happened on the Sunday evening. So Monday morning was a really busy day at work, and I've never heard the phone ring that much since I've worked here.
The best story I've covered so far this year, you know what? I really enjoyed the build-up to the federal election. That was a lot of fun to follow. I wasn't actually here on election night, but I was following a number of things in the build-up to it, so I would consider that to be a story that I was following, and it was enjoyable and exciting.
The best story I've covered so far this year is kind of a sequence of stories, the Mark Twitchell murder trial, which ultimately culminated to be one of the best stories in the city, I would say.
I gotta say it was the Indy last year. I've actually covered the Indy twice. Before that, I had no knowledge of that type of sport. I wasn't even sure it was a sport, but I've gained a real appreciation ever since, and I'm not going to sit there on a Sunday and watch a full race, but I do follow it now. So that was one instance where covering a story actually got me interested in something.
Probably my favorite story would be when my brother went to Toronto, and his vacation happened to fall during the G20 and G8 summits. Just the only time he could get off work. So he happened to be there, and so I called him just to see what was Toronto like during the summits. And he said some really interesting things, and then he said he was actually going to visit the demonstrations one day, which my mother was less than pleased to hear, because he of course wasn't going to tell her. She heard it on iNews while she was driving home from work. So let's just say I think he got a terse phone call from my mother after that story.
If by best you mean biggest news story, it certainly wasn't a happy story, was definitely the Slave Lake fire. I spent almost an entire week at the Edmonton Expo Center talking to some of the refugees and the people who had unfortunately been evacuated from their homes, and a lot of people who had lost their homes. That was a very emotional story, a very sad story for a lot of people who lost their property, and certainly something that I won't forget.
The best story I've done so far this year, now let me preface this with saying that it was a horrible thing that happened, and the devastation was just mind-boggling, but I would say the best story I covered this year was the Slave Lake wildfire. It gave me a chance to travel to a northern Alberta community that I had never visited before. I met some fantastic people, I made some great friends, and it was certainly the most intense and the most interesting story I've ever covered in my life, let alone this year.
The most interesting story I've covered this year. I don't know if I can think of the most interesting, but the one that I may have actually enjoyed the most was kind of a sad occasion, actually, was when Rod Phillips retired. And not that I got to cover it or even talk to Rod at all, but he was on Bruce Bowie's show on the 6:30 CHED Morning News, and I got to take some audio of that interview and then turn it into kind of a tribute/news story. And whenever I get the chance, I like to put audio, sound effects, that kind of thing into a story if I can. And so I had a lot of fun actually going through old Oilers clips, old calls abroad, and listening to some of like the championship calls from the 80s. And it was enough to send chills down my spine. So it was pretty exciting to listen to, Glenn Anderson scores, all that stuff from a voice like Rod Phillips. There was just nothing like it. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, all right.